Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Urban and Community IPM webinar on rat management. I'm Lauren Fordyce, the Urban IPM educator with UC IPM. Thank you for joining us today. So we are excited to have presenting today Dr. Niamh Quinn. Niamh is a human-wildlife interactions advisor based at the South Coast Research and Extension Center in Irvine, California. Her research and educational program deal with everything from mice to mountain lions in residential and industrial areas, but currently she focuses on rodents, their management, and the pathways and effects of rodenticides on non-target wildlife. We're grateful for having you today, Niamh. You can now share your slides and begin.
Thanks a million, Lauren, and thanks to UCIPM for having me. And I have a lot to cover today, so I'm just gonna get right to it. So I'm going to talk about the management of commensal rodents. So that's nori rats, roof rats, and house mice. But we're mostly going to focus on rats today. And I just want to let you know that um, there are many options for managing rats. Some of them are kind of do-it-yourself options. Others are more appropriate for and often only legal for professional pest management professionals. All of these will be discussed during this webinar. Some of them you may not like, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to talk about them, because some people will use them, and it's your choice. But we want to make sure that all um, options for rodent management are used properly and most effectively. We don't have time to get into the differences between the individual species too much, but just know that there are some differences, but you can definitely pick those up on the UCIPM pest note. Because I didn't want to do some of the old boring stuff that we've covered before. I wanted to cover some of our newer research that we can talk about. Um, I also want to let you know that even though we won't mention them specifically today, that wood wraps can be snap trapped and live trapped and euthanized as long as they aren't protected. We do have one protected wood rat, the riparian wood rat, and it's in a very small area. And you can see it here. Just to orientate yourself, this is like Los Baños, and then we have the Aqueduct of the Five coming up here, Stanislaus County, San Joaquin County, and then I think this is the 290 here, maybe. So like they're in Modesto, they're in a very small geographic location. So we're going to focus a lot today on trapping, and I want to talk about rat trapping success and how to be successful at rat trapping. And so you can follow some fairly simple rules. One of them is to identify your rodent, so making sure you know the difference between a rat and a mouse. And you can use the UCIPM pest notes to help you identify what you have. Um, you need to put out a lot of devices. It's not easy to manage rodents. If it was, there would be way less of them, and there's loads of them, and even the professionals struggle. So it's really important to do that. We're going to talk about what pre-baiting is, but it's also really important to pre-bait when you are managing rats and mice. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about neophobia. And neophobia is the fear of new things. And it's really difficult to overcome that in rats. Rats are just so smart and so clever, and they really don't want to um, go near some of our devices, which is kind of unfortunate because like that's what we do. We put out new things, and rats are inherently kind of wary of them. And so we're going to talk about what's going on. So let's talk about selecting the correct trap. Now, if you go to Home Depot or if you look on the internet, there's like a suite of rat trapping devices. And it's hard to know which is which. Now, there are several different types of traps. And so I think most of you are probably very familiar with this old style Victor wooden trap. And maybe some of you have even lost fingers in these traps while trying to set them. And so this is the old style of it, and then this is the new style of it. And then these are kind of the newer style, what we call easy set traps. And so the difference between these is that these have what we call an expanded trigger. So you can see here the trigger is very small, and you can see on all of these other traps the trigger is very large. And the expanded trigger is an important thing to consider. Oh, the other thing is size. You can catch a rat in a mouse trap and you can't catch a mouse in a rat trap. So it's really important to know what you have. Um, Live trapping is a really great way to catch rats. But I will tell you now that it is more of a tool that I would recommend for a professional outfit, because one of the problems is that once you get the rat in the trap, it's live. And someone, like most people, just don't know what to do with it. There are major benefits of live trapping, and one of the major benefits of it is that if you get a non-target species in your trap, you're not going to kill it. You'll be able to release it. So whether that be like a squirrel or a native rodent that you don't like, that you don't mind having around your yard, or a skunk or a possum or something like that, that you're not as concerned about. But it is very time consuming. It definitely can require some wildlife handling skills sometimes. Like I said, it requires euthanasia, but it is our preferred method for rat collection because it is a very, very successful method. But obviously, there's huge pros and cons when considering live trapping. Now, once you catch it, you cannot release it. So, what the Department of Fish and Wildlife says is that when you use traps, which is in section 465.5, you must do what we call immediate dispatch or release. And release means released there and then. Okay, so all four-bearing and non-game mammals that are legal to trap must be immediately killed or released, unless released trapped animals shall be killed or shooting where local ordinance, landowners and safety permits are required, right? And so you can let it go on your property, but that's it. Your options are either kill it or let it go where you caught it, which is, I don't know why you would bother, because you've just wasted a lot of time um, trying to catch the thing, and they're not that easy. So if you're going to consider live trapping, you just have to remember that you're going to have a live rodent and you have to send it to Jesus somehow. And we'll talk about that too. So let's talk about glue traps. Now, glue traps are becoming more and more unpopular across the United States, and for very good reason as well. However, glue traps are a really, really important tool. Now, this is an example of glue traps that are placed really, really badly. So rodents are not stupid. They will not accidentally wander into your glue traps. And if you look here, there's a glue trap here. There's one here, there's one here, there's one here, one here, one here, one here. You can see another one back there. And I think there's a few more scattered in behind here. And what the rodent will do is the rodent will just like snake in and out between them. The other thing that's wrong with this glue trap is that it's baited. Okay, glue traps do not work like that. Glue traps are kind of, I often don't recommend them for use for the homeowner, because you have to have ridiculous in-depth knowledge of rodent biology to make it work properly. So you almost need your rodent to fall into it as opposed to walk into it, if that makes sense. People ask me how the rodents die on glue traps, and they probably dehydrate or die of stress, basically, from being stuck to the glue board. I've also seen rats being eaten by other rats while they're stuck to glue boards too. So not the best way to go, probably. There are issues with non-targets with all rodent control devices, but if you do choose to use glue, I recommend that you do not use it outside, because you will absolutely 100% catch non-target wildlife on it. And yes, non-target wildlife can be like undone from a glue board, but this bird is never going to be able to fly ever again, and it would have to have been euthanized more than likely. It's very stressful, very cruel, but yet glue is a very important tool, um, but not recommended for all uses. But in places like restaurants, food service, things like that, glue becomes very, very important. This is actually a picture of a glue board in a school, which often has horrendous rat problems. And this is a professional application, and there's so many things wrong with it. And the first thing that's wrong with it is that it's baited. You should never ever bait a glue board. And rodents are not stupid. You have to think about very tactically about placement. And so the rats were actually running along these conduits here. They weren't ever dropping down here. And so the rats are just not dumb. They're just not going to come down and feed off the glue And that's just not how it works. Now you may catch juveniles on glue, because little kids are often dumb no matter what the species is, but it's very rarely that you would catch a mature adult feeding off this kind of situation. Now, if you do use glue and you get someone stuck to it, your pet, your child, your husband, whatever, there are there are ways that you can remove them. The glue is quite sticky, and so be aware that those are available online. Now, for traps, you have to use multiple traps in the right place. So I talking about the different rats, and I said we weren't going to get into too much details, but roof rats a lot of the time are like arboreal. They're like up higher. Norway rats are in generally kind of terrestrial and on the ground or even under the ground. And mice are mostly terrestrial. However, all species can and will climb. So you just have to think a little bit about what you have in your area and how you're going to trap them, to see what you can get. This is my own backyard, claw types, easy set traps. They only set in the one direction. So these traps here that are pointing downwards will set like that. And then this one here is a dummy trap, and that it will not set. Now I do have a box in my home sent to me from a manufacturer, of a group of traps like these clam style traps, that actually will set in multiple directions. So I believe that it's something that the manufacturers are working on. But it's really important to cluster your traps, whenever you trap. And obviously, ideally, you can cluster them. If you could cluster them like this and they would all work like this, it would be ideal. So if you could open this one and open all these when you set them, it's great. The one thing that's really bad about this is that there's a spider web covering this one, and the traps will not work if there's too many webs, because what happens is the spiders get their vibrissae stuck in the spider web, or their whiskers stuck in the spider web. And so it's important to make sure that you have clean traps. And you can see here, here's another example of clustering. This trap here will set, but these two traps here will set, but this one here in the middle will not, unless you get access to these new traps that do that. But just be aware. It's only anecdotal, but I've been trapping in my backyard for a number of years now, and I've never actually caught a non-target species trapping like this off my fence line. I very rarely trap on the ground because I don't want to catch any birds. And I also don't want to unset my traps at night because I'm too busy. And so this has worked great for me in my situation, which is in for roof rats. And like I said, I've been doing this for years and never once caught a non-target. This is another way to also cluster your traps. So this is on a papaya tree, and if you can see in the background here where the rat had like decimated the papaya, and this is in a pre-baiting phase, which we'll talk about in a minute. You can actually see the pre-bait here on the traps. But this is because you don't know if the rat's going to come from here down the branch or going to come down the trunk and up this way. These are some photos from my colleague of other ways to place traps, and it's always great to cluster your traps, but you want to have them in the right place. This is not the right way to set traps. What you want to do is you want to set them with the triggers facing away from each other, like in these examples here, these two examples here. Whereas what happens here is that if the rat runs up or down the pole, it doesn't see the trigger first. So you basically want to put the trigger in the way of the rat, just like this. So you can see here we have a classic rodent run, and we have more examples of clustering traps, right? More than one trap in the area. And you can see here that in the run is the trigger, right? The trigger is right here. So perfect placement, and obviously great success.
Yes.
Yeah, I just had to come out of PowerPoint mode because the video won't play. So anyway, when you let the trap off, the trap shouldn't move. What should happen is that all the energy is focused in on the trigger. And so when the trigger depresses, the bar comes down and it hits the animal with the maximum amount of force. And you can see if you do it there that the trap is just jumping, and the force is some of the force going into the trap, moving the trap itself. When you anchor your trap, which is what I do, what happens is that the full force of your trap is, here we go, is engaged in just the one thing, which is the kill bar that is coming down on your rat. And we are not going to pretend that we're not here today to talk about how to send rats to Jesus. We are here to make sure that we kill them with the utmost efficiency and humaneness. And so it's very, very important that you anchor your trap so when that kill bar comes down, that it does in fact kill your rat with a big blow. Let me just get back into presentation mode. Okay, hopefully you guys can see that now. All right. So people always ask me what's the right attractant, and we're not really sure yet, but I'm going to discuss some research that we're doing that may help with this. And so I work with a lot of pest management professionals, and pretty much every single one of them has their own secret sauce. But like, you can use all sorts of things. You can use like sweet things, you can use nutty things, you can use dry seeds, you can use fatty things, you can use fruits. It probably is very dependent on what the rat is eating. And now there hasn't been a whole lot of studies on what rats eat, but we're trying to change that. And so we have started looking at the diets of commensal roof rats in Southern California to try and understand better what these rats are eating, and then also to help pest management professionals like be more strategic about how they manage rats themselves. And so we've rats mostly here from Orange County and Los Angeles County. Um, and that the main reason for our kind of our more narrow collection of rats is because we need to also collect prey. And because of that, our collection was limited to California. And you can see one of my students that worked on this project, she's collected a number of fruits that or foods that she's analyzed. Everything from spiders to cockroaches to cherimoyas to larvae, pill bugs, prickly pear, slugs, snails. And then this is my favorite in here, which is the churro. Because the rats of Southern California obviously get their fair share of churros. And we've looked at what they eat using something called stable isotope analysis. And I'm not going to get into what exactly stable isotope analysis is, but what it can do is it can tell us kind of broadly what rats are eating. And so we know that in these 3 different sites that their diets is very, very different. So in homes, they're eating a lot of plants, whereas it's much more varied in our commercial areas. And then in schools, you can see that they're actually eating a lot of invertebrates, and that's likely probably slugs and snails as well in here. So we know that the rats in homes are really relying on what we call C3 plants. And, we know that there's abundance of these foods in backyards and gardens, and that the rats from schools and also our commercial areas, but we need to do more work in there, are much more varied. And then this reflects the kind of the diversity and the anthropogenic food sources available in these settings. And I think we all know that rats eat citrus, and I don't know if you know this, but they're fairly partial to cockroaches too. But I recently came across a ramen eating rat also on some site visits. So like, rats will literally eat anything. And so one of the things about managing rats in California is that people keep pushing that sanitation is really, really important, but it seems like it may be that sanitation is only particularly important in certain sites, because in certain sites where the diet is varied, they may be relying on like quote unquote trash, whereas in other areas they're relying more on natural foods, which we don't really focus on removing, especially if you're a master gardener or a homeowner that has like fruits in their yard, or even a lot of invertebrates. Now, there are also commercially available bait attractants for any of the professionals that are joining us today. Some of these are pretty interesting. There's something like the Narrowlure that's kind of like a plug for a trap, and these two, the Airzonics from VM. They're quite strong smelling, and you can place them in the trap. We've used these before with some success. And we use this a lot, which is rat and mouse attractant, which is not available to the homeowner. readily anyway. There's also like a macadamia nut type lure, and then this also is like kind of like a paste that you can put in your trap. Now, a lot of these are available on what you call like do my own pest control, I think. So like if you wanted to try some of them, you probably could find someone. So that's the Narrowlure, the Arizonics. This is called Trapper Jacks. This is now actually called No Tox Soft, and then the Provoke from Bell. Um, and it doesn't always have to be food. You can use cotton, you can use dental floss, you can use yarn, you can use bits of foil. Often these materials here, the like the floss and the yarn and stuff, can be pretty great for mice, and particularly great for females that are breeding, and so we'll use it for nesting materials. Also, if you've competition for bait, like go back to these ones here, because they're not actual food. These can be good options if you have ants and roaches and stuff stealing your bait. And obviously, if you're going to use cotton, dental floss, or yarn, the ants and the roaches are not really into this. The options often allow for quicker settings of traps. So if you're a professional, like you can tie all these in before you get to your site and set them all. And also these matrices can also be dipped into food as well. So that's something to think about. Now, what I will tell you is that this wad of cotton is way too big. You're talking about wisps. You don't want to put huge pieces of it on your trap, because what will happen is that the rat will come and it will just very carefully just pull this off, and it won't set your trap off. Now, I did say that I was going to mention pre-baiting, and pre-baiting is where you leave your traps open and you provide food to the rats. And I think it probably sounds counterintuitive, because a dead rat is a dead rat and it doesn't really matter when you kill it, but it absolutely 100% does. So there's a lot of literature that shows that if you pre-bait your rat traps, that you not only will you catch more rats, but you actually catch them over a shorter period of time. And I also believe, although there's not a huge amount of literature that shows it, that the demographics of the rats are much broader as well when you pre-bait. So you're going to get like more adults, more reproductive adults, and those are the ones you want, because the rats with the big balls and the big boobs are the ones that make the babies, and that's what's really important when you catch traps. We also know that certain types of traps can have better successes. Certain types of stations have better successes, and that cameras overall are detecting more individuals than any of these devices, which basically means that you're never ever going to catch all the rats. That's basically what that means. Now, we've been doing something for a really long time, which we call supplemental sprinkles, which is providing bait, not only outside traps, but also bait stations. And I'll talk a little bit more about this research in depth, but we have shown that providing supplemental bait outside bait stations improves the consumption of bait inside the bait stations. Now, we didn't look at this for bait stations that also contain traps, but it is likely that there are either the rats are spending more time or coming more frequently to the bait stations, which means that like providing what we call the supplemental bait is a really good way. Now, there are a few rules for doing pre-baiting. Initially, when you pre-bait, you want to use a lot. Um, but when you're trapping, a little goes a very long way, and it's important to not overbait like this, because this is kind of like the same as the cotton. If the rat comes into the side and bites onto this cheese, it'll just pull it off and the trigger won't go off at all. Also, this looks like it's really nice cheese for Trader Joe's, so that's just a waste as well. This is an example of pre-baiting versus baiting for an active trap, and you can see here like the bait is kind of smeared all over the trigger. And then here you can see it's just in the bait cup. And pre-baiting is about learning how to trust the trap as a food source. So you want your rat to come in and like really, really engage with that trap. And so when you do set it, your rat's head is all the way in there and the bar is just going to come down and kill it. And so you can see here that, you know, this rat, like they spend some time, they know that the trap is a food source. And so it's really, really important to do it. Now, people have been given probably like hundreds of thousands of dollars to design some of these traps. And obviously you can see here probably from this this thing that this is a very hard rat to trap because we have an electrocution trap here. We have a clam style trap here. We have the old style Victor Wooden trap here. And I just want to play this again for you. So the way this trap is designed is it's designed so the bait cup is below the trigger, but some idiot did it. So oh, here we go. So anyway, so this grape here is obviously above the trigger, and that's one of the things that you want to be really careful of, is that when you do have the tool, that you're going to use it properly. And you can see the rat comes along and does exactly what we would say, is that there's too much bait in there, and it takes the trap. It takes the bait away and the trap doesn't go off. Now, it mightn't be the greatest trap in the world either, so that's one thing to remember, is that these traps do not last forever. So you'd want to maybe check your trap every so often, get a little stick and put a little bit of pressure on the trigger. And if it takes too much pressure to set it off, it's probably time to throw it in the bin. Now, let's talk about catching the right rat. And catching the right rat is kind of an indicator of your success. And here's a really good example, actually, of an anchored trap. You see here, you can see where I actually anchored it to a piece of wood, and then I actually anchored the trap to the piece of wood, and then I anchored the trap to my fence line. And you can see here I caught a big male. And how do I know it's a big male? Well, the big males have big balls. Basically, you can see them hanging off the back of them underneath their tail, really easy to determine. And you want to catch the males like that. And you also want to catch the reproductively active females. So the big balls and the big boobs. Now, just in case you were wondering, and probably none of you are eating your lunch right now, but this is what the inside of a reproductively active rat looks like. And I want to point out a few things here. So this is the uterus of the rat here. Okay, this is one side, which is totally empty, and this is the other side that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 babies stuffed into it. Also, this rat has a huge filled stomach, and I don't know if you guys can tell, but right here at the end is a big group of parasitic eggs, right? Not ideal. Then if you see here, 1, 2, 3, and you can see another one here, these are what we call unfurred nipples. And unfurred nipples are characteristics of rats that are feeding young. And so we know that not only is this female growing babies in the inside, she is also feeding babies on the outside. I would say those are really bad reproductive choices, as someone that often doesn't sleep because of their tiny human. But whatever, she's free to make her own decisions. But like, rats are just the most ridiculous reproducers everywhere, which is one of the reasons why they're so difficult to control. Now, there's this kind of story where you have these king rats, these rats that protect their food sources. And this is given to me by a colleague, and you can see that one rat's really interested in doing something other than eating, and one rat just wants to eat. And it could be that that rat is protecting those food sources too, and will not let that other rat consume. And so it's important to make sure that you have lots of traps available to the rats, because you want to make sure that, you know, one rat isn't protecting a load of resources and not letting other rats near them. And you never have one rat. It's never, ever, ever one rat. So you need multiple devices. You know, we've talked a little bit about neophobia, but there's also something called trap shyness. And so neophobia is the fear of new objects, experiences, and interactions. It's an instinctive behavior, but trap shyness is a learned behavior. And if you trap incorrectly and you frighten the shite out of your rat, that rat's never going to come back again. Like, never, ever, ever, ever. So if your trap goes off and it hits it on the nose, or hits it on the tail, or it gets its paw, and you don't kill it, probably never going to get that rat ever near your trap ever again. And that's going to eat your tomatoes till the day you die, or the day it dies, more likely. But yeah. Now we also have something called device avoidance, and we're not really sure what's going on here, but you know, these are bait stations that can either host snap traps or rodenticide bait, or monitoring tools as well. And you can see that, like, this rat's not afraid of this bait station. It's not avoiding this bait station. In fact, it's grooming on the top of it, but it will not go inside it. And that's a problem. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our research surrounding that too, if I have time. But you can see here the neophobia of this rat that's coming up to see this device, right? You see it? Look. It's there, it's new. It's like, oh no, right? Whereas this rat is trap shy, right? It knows that there's food there, but it's had a negative interaction. And it remembers. And so rodents learn through experience. Memorable pain is a good teacher to all of us. And so if you're sloppy, improper trapping or monitoring or baiting, you're going to get yourself into trouble and get this kind of bait shyness or device avoidance potentially as well. Now, I will tell you, this is a video shared to me. Hopefully, it's going to play by my colleagues at Sprague Pest Control. And there's here we go. You can see there's the trap, and this is in real time. The rodent's going to go, it's going to hit it, and it's going to do a 180. That trap is 100% in the best place it can be, and you can see now it's going to be slowed down. The rat's coming, and what's happened is that the rat's whiskers have just sensed that there's something that shouldn't be there, and that trap was in the most perfect place, and they still couldn't catch that rat. And so I just want to show you like that it's very, very difficult. Now, you need to be very mindful of non-target wildlife. You can cover your traps, but just be aware that things like skunks and possums could potentially still get their hands like stuck in some of these things, and you don't want to catch any songbirds. One of the easiest ways to avoid catching songbirds is to not trap during the day. And you need to modify that. And we know, like when you look at our research of when we're detecting rats, like we're detecting them mostly at night, and this is not a time when songbirds are active. Be very, very safe when you're disposing of your things. You should be wearing gloves. I would say you should even be wearing gloves when you're handling your traps. You can place them in plastic bags and put them in the trash. I will say that some cities have special ordinances that do not let you put dead animals in the trash. I did have a master, like a master of master gardeners that was so good at trapping that didn't want to put her rats in the trash, so she would walk them to the local park and put them there. And I just thought that was genius. But I don't. You didn't hear that from me. Watch out for fleas and ticks. And also for mites, especially with roof rats. You won't come across fleas and ticks too much with roof rats. You will see them with nori rats, but mites can be a big issue. You can't throw them away if you're very close to the water line within 150 feet. And so you can't dispose of the viscera or carcasses of dead mammals if you're within that near to the water line, but you can turn your rats into slippers or jewelry to sell on Etsy. If you're worried about getting some additional income, there are those options apparently, especially if you are a bit handy and creative. Always great to use game cameras to see what's going on. You can use them to help you place devices. You can help them to help you detect what species you have, or if you've been successful with your management. We also have other traps, things like the Nooski, this kind of like, it's like a stairway trap where the rats fall into, like the rat zappers or the A24s. There hasn't been a lot of research done on any of these, and they're not used that often, but you can still try them. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to talk a little bit about rodenticide for now. Um, there are many, many active ingredients available. Right now, we still have access to some anticoagulant rodenticides. There is resistance in parts of the US, although there hasn't until recently. We have found that there is in fact resistance to second generation anticoagulant rodenticides in California. And we know that we found them in actually master gardener backyards from all these places. And so it's good to know, especially in ag areas where we will still be able to use these products. Now, if you look at what's available in California, basically what's down here at the end is what's available still in California. Come the 1st of January, almost all of these will not be available for use either by the homeowner or by the professional, except in very, very limited uses. And all of these here, often some of them are just not ideal. But we have bromethalin, which is a neurotoxin, and it causes tremors, seizures, and it's what we call an acute rodenticide. So the onset of your symptoms is very, very quick. if you require a lethal dose. The problem with something that's very, very quick is that you can often get what we call bait shyness, because if you get a little bit sick, you're often disinclined to go back to eat the rest. It's not known to have lethal secondary impacts, but we are finding bromethylene in wildlife, and there has been recent publications. There's something called a self-limiting or stop feed or cease feeding, which means that they don't overfeed on it, and and it's not any magic ingredient. It's just that the rat gets so sick when they eat this is that they can't eat anymore. And there is not an antidote, but there's a treatment for decontamination if a non-target animal like a dog gets into it. We also have cholecalciferol available. Toxic doses of cholecalciferol lead to too much calcium in the blood, and so it's actually vitamin D3, and it is naturally occurring, but at higher doses, it really interferes with your ability to process, and your calcium levels just basically become overwhelming and become toxic. It can be toxic from multiple or one-time exposure, but it is dose dependent, as are a lot of toxicants. Signs in animals include things like weakness, depression, loss of appetite. Also can be very acute, which it can also lead to bait shyness. It's not known to have lethal secondary impacts. It's kind of hard one to detect because it is, you can only touch it, you can test for the metabolite, which is vitamin D3, and vitamin D3 is naturally occurring, and yeah, we're not really sure what we're seeing. That's a kind of a complicated one. There's also like a stop feed for that, but once again, it's not a magic ingredient to stop the animal eating it. It's just the animal gets so sick that it can't. And then once again, no antidote, but there is treatment for decontamination. We have strychnine still available, but that's not generally used for rats and mice. It's actually only really used for gophers. It's really acute, as in like within 15 minutes. But it's not assimilated into the tissues or bones, and so there's no known residues, unless an animal is consumed very quickly after it eats the product itself. And it requires below ground applications. There is something called behavioral resistance for strychnine, and so that can be a problem too. And we also have zinc phosphide, which can also be used for rats and mice, and it's very, very acute as well. But there's often issues with it because it has quite a strong odor, and so it has bait shyness issues too. And it can remain toxic for several months, so you have to make sure that you're applying it correctly. For rats, especially burrowing rodents like the nori rat. So if you live in an area like LA or the Bay Area that has these burrowing rodents, and these burrowing rats, sorry, you can use dry ice or what's called rat ice. You have to actually use specially labeled dry ice. You can't use any dry ice to do this, which is, I mean, I don't make the rules and I don't even vote for them. So some of them are just ridiculously dumb. But you also need a special license now as a professional to work with carbon dioxide. And then there are certain requirements for applying carbon monoxide as well. And so I think I'm running out of time because Kerry, there's quite a lot of questions, right?
There are a lot of questions, so if you want to wrap up
Yeah, I'm gonna
soon.
just skip some of this stuff because I think that if there's too many questions, we can cover some of the research in another one too. But we've been doing research for years and years and years in the backyards of our UC Master Gardener volunteers, mostly in Orange County, but also LA and Orange. And so I just want to give them a bit of a shout out and say thank you very much for letting us basically be your little stalkers in your backyard for so many years and collecting so much data that we can share with other, members of the public, other master gardeners and professionals. If you didn't get your question answered today, I'm more than happy for you to contact me. Email is definitely the best way to get me. You can call me, but I won't answer my phone. But if you leave a message, I might call you back. And then you can reach us on social media, which we're sometimes active on. It depends on how busy we are. But at Cosmopolitan Coyote on our Instagram is probably the most. If you're interested in our research projects, they're mostly up to date on our website, www.ucscurry.com. And I don't have my Instagram in here, but it's LinkedIn/ratwhacker. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn as well. So that's it. Thank you. And I believe we have some questions, so I'm happy to answer those.
Yes, thank you, Niamh, for a great presentation.